Coming up on the Threat Status podcast, we talk to award-winning American journalist Jonathan Broder, the former longtime war correspondent who writes now for the Spy Talk platform and is an expert on Mideast affairs. He takes us inside the implications of President Trump's high-stakes White House summit this week with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We also dive into the latest developments surrounding the administration's push for some kind of deal to end the Ukraine war, and national security reporter Vaughn Cockayne walks us through the surge in mysterious drone activity over sensitive military sites in NATO countries, and much more. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status podcast. I'm Guy Taylor, National Security Editor here at the Washington Times. I will be hosting this week's episode, which we're taping on the afternoon of Thursday, November 20. National Security Correspondent Ben Wolfgang is away this week, so I've got Vaughn Cockayne with me as my partner. As you may already know, Vaughn is the lead geopolitics and diplomatic correspondent on the Threat Status reporting team. His coverage of the State Department, world affairs, and conflicts and evolving U.S. policy towards all of it is featured just about every week in the Threat Status Daily newsletter. So, Vaughn, thanks for being here, man. What's on your radar this week?
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for the introduction. I'm glad to be here. So first up on my radar, we have the update on the Ukrainian peace deal that was reported earlier this week. President Trump apparently has approved a 28-point Ukrainian peace plan to end the war that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has been quietly negotiating for over a month. The deal, which has not been made public, reportedly includes significant land concessions for Russia, including handing over control of the Donbass region. The U.S. also will formally recognize Russia's ownership of the Crimean Peninsula, which it invaded in 2014. Ukraine, in turn, will receive a security guarantee reportedly from the U.S., but will see its military reduced by approximately 60% to a maximum of 400,000 personnel. In addition to conversations with Russian diplomats, Mr. Witkoff has been reportedly briefed European and Ukrainian officials on the developing peace deal, including Rustem Umerov, national security advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky. There's still no indication that Ukraine has approved of the deal's provisions, and the land concessions and military reductions may in fact kill the plan in Kiev's eyes.
Vaughn, just to be clear here, you're talking about leaks to the media in the last couple of days about back channel U.S.-Russia discussions about a new proposed 28 or 29 point deal with no indication that the Ukrainians are actually on board with any of this.
Right. There's no real indication that Ukraine has approved of any of these provisions, and the land concessions and military reductions may in fact kill the deal in Kiev's eyes. European leaders have already pushed back on the deal, arguing it would mean capitulation.
Right. But the deal isn't even public. I mean, Steve Witkoff has not said anything publicly on the record to us or to anybody else. We have a handful of other news organizations basically having officials close to it claiming that this is what's in it. So we're watching it closely, but it's such a fluid situation. What comes next at this point? Because I know that Zelensky was in Turkey this week trying to cozy up to Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, get his support for continuing the fight against Russia. Where do we go from here unless Trump holds a press conference or Witkoff holds a press conference and actually announces that this proposed deal is real?
Really, we're just waiting for Ukraine and their representatives to comment on this deal, to get more information on this deal. Like I said, it's unclear exactly how Ukraine is going to take these concessions, if they're going to accept them at all. And Turkey, being a receptive partner, again, it's still unclear if we're going to get any kind of face-to-face negotiations with Russia. The last time we had any kind of real negotiations between Ukraine and Russia was in July. So yeah, like you said, it's a fluid situation and we'll keep watching it. Next on the radar is a special dispatch from France from Times correspondent Guillaume Tac. which details fears in Europe over how alleged Russian drone incursions have been testing NATO's air defenses. He reports that in November, two drone sightings spooked French authorities. One saw a drone flying over police stations and a military convoy transporting main battle tanks. But just 2 days earlier, authorities had spotted a drone above an ammunition and explosives plant in Bergerac. The sightings are part of a broader trend of drone sightings all across Europe and NATO. Sightings in Germany, Denmark, and Belgium have closed airports, and German police now have been authorized to shoot down potentially hostile drones. While most NATO leaders are reluctant to blame Moscow for all the drone sightings, the incidents have kicked off an effort to bolster the alliance's air defenses, including a push to build a, quote, drone wall on Europe's eastern flank to prevent further incursions.
So the Russians deny publicly, they've denied that they're behind this, right? But there seems to be a consensus among European and American officials that it's Russia that's doing this.
Yeah, we really don't have any confirmation that Russia has been doing it. The only confirmation we do have is that there have been incidents where Russian jets have, according to Moscow, accidentally crossed over into Estonian airspace. But when it comes to drones, Russia has been reluctant to take acceptance of the allegations from some European leaders.
Thanks, Vaughn. For my own part, I've spent much of the past few days unpacking the high stakes visit to Washington by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, also known simply by the initials MBS. He met with President Trump at the White House on November 18. We're going to dig into some real nuances of that MBS visit in a few minutes in our feature interview with Jonathan Broder, particularly the way that Trump has a kind of fascination with Saudi Arabia for both U.S. strategic reasons, but also his own personal interests. From a U.S. policy standpoint, probably the biggest takeaway from the November 18th summit was that Trump and MBS inked a new U.S. Saudi strategic defense agreement. And then President Trump, interestingly, put icing on the cake, so to speak, at a White House dinner that he hosted for MBS on the night of the 18th by announcing that the United States is now formally designating Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally. This is a big deal for a range of reasons. Remember that Saudi Arabia is sort of the great Arab counterweight to Iran in the Middle East. And the other major non-NATO ally in the region is Israel, which views Iran as its primary enemy. So it's long been a goal of President Trump to try and align the Saudis and the Israelis. It's an elusive goal because the Saudis currently don't even recognize Israel diplomatically, even though Riyadh has long sought to achieve parity with Israel militarily, or at least in terms of U.S. military support. They want the U.S. to give Saudi Arabia the same kinds of weapons and support that only Israel receives from the U.S. So one of the eye-opening developments of the Trump MBS summit was that Trump said publicly, and the White House backed it up with a published fact sheet, that the two had, quote, reached an agreement, end quote, for the Saudis to purchase U.S.-made F-35 fighter jets. That's a pretty thrilling announcement for the U.S. defense industrial base, Vaughn, particularly Lockheed Martin, which makes the F-35. Although details right now remain somewhat vague on F-35 production for the Saudis and delivery dates on this agreement, beyond Mr. Trump claiming during the summit that the Saudis have agreed to increase their investments in the U.S. to a whopping $1 trillion. Listeners can go read all about this in the threat status newsletter pages at the Washington Times website. There was another key point in the summit, though, Vaughn. MBS did say publicly that Saudi Arabia does, quote, want to be part of the Abraham Accords, end quote. That has long been President Trump's goal, because joining the Abraham Accords would mean diplomatic normalization between the Saudis and Israel. The catch is that there remain all kinds of roadblocks to this. Again, we're about to get into those issues in our interview with Jonathan Broder. The last thing about the MBS Trump summit, though, was that President Trump drew pretty harsh criticism from U.S. media during the summit because he openly defended MBS over the 2018 killing of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Remember, Vaughn, Khashoggi was the Washington Post opinion columnist who was shockingly and sadly murdered and dismembered inside the Saudi consulate in Turkey back in 2018. Of course, a CIA assessment that year concluded that it was actually Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman who ordered the killing. I digress for now on that. I do want to highlight one other quick item from recent days. It's on a totally different topic, and that's the push by U.S. companies right now to compete with China in the global rare earths processing market. We've talked about rare earths, the magnets from which are critical to advanced technology, microchips, electronics, car computers, weaponry, and so on. It caught my eye this week, Vaughn, that the American rare earth magnet company Vulcan Elements announced plans to build a $1 billion factory in Benson, North Carolina. For those paying attention to the nuanced tea leaves of U.S. China great power competition, this is a big deal. China is well understood to dominate the rare earths processing market in the world and to be using it as leverage over the U.S. in trade negotiations. This Vulcan Elements announcement is the second major rare earths development we've highlighted in the Threat Status newsletter recently. You'll remember that in our podcast episode on September 5, 2025, we actually interviewed Nick Myers, the CEO and co-founder of the company Phoenix Tailings, which made its own headlines recently by opening a rare earths processing plant in Exeter, New Hampshire that will operate without any inputs from China. Jonathan Broder is an award-winning American journalist who's about as experienced as any war correspondent alive today. He's covered stories in more than 50 countries over a career spanning several decades, most notably 20 or so years as a foreign correspondent in the Middle East, South Asia, China, and East Asia for the Chicago Tribune and the Associated Press over the years. John, for the younger folks who listen here, I'll put it simply, you're a legend and you still write, most regularly for Spy Talk, the amazing platform on Substack. So without further ado, thanks for coming on the Threat Status podcast.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
I was lucky to hang out with you a few months ago at the Aspen Security Forum, and we got into a pretty interesting discussion about the fast evolving geopolitics in the Middle East. I want to start there. So much has gone on within the context of Israel, Gaza, Iran, the rise of a new government in Syria. Here's my question. Given your long experience in the region, does the U.S. actually have clear strategic interests in the region in 2026? And in your view, has Trump or the administration given a clear articulation of what those interests are and how to effectively pursue them?
I think we have to divide what Trump's interests are, which sometimes overlap with U.S. interests, and the America's interests that go beyond Trump. Okay, so Trump's interests are obviously Saudi Arabia, which he wants to make sort of the centerpiece of his Middle East policy. He's trying to get them to join the Abraham Accords, and the Abraham Accords were, from his first administration, a pretty significant accomplishment. We can't take that away from him. He convinced the UAE and Bahrain and then Sudan and Morocco all to sign peace treaties with Israel, which is no small thing. Of course, the sort of the jewel in the crown would be Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has made it clear that they will not sign any peace treaty with Israel or recognize Israel officially until there is some path toward a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side. As we all know, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was in Washington these past few days. He had a very, very successful visit from his point of view. He got the United States to agree to sell him F-35 warplanes. The only other country in the Middle East that has that is Israel. There's a question there of whether that would erode Israel's qualitative military edge, which the United States is required by law to maintain. So there'll be a certain balancing act there. He got the United States to agree to provide him with the most sophisticated microchips to basically fuel his desire to be a major player in artificial intelligence. And he also made clear to Trump in a conversation just before he came that whatever the United States refuses to give him in terms of technological support, he'll just turn to China.
So it's like he's playing kind of hardball. First, just want to ask you, is MBS ever really going to recognize Israel as a country and sign the Abraham Accords? And do you ever see that really happening?
It's really, really difficult to see. I mean, if it were to happen ever, it would probably be a number of years down the line. You'd have to have a different government in Israel, first of all, because the government will not accept the creation of a Palestinian state. And I would add that even in the wake of October 7th, no Israeli political party, even on the left or in the center, would accept a Palestinian state unless it were demilitarized, incredibly circumscribed. I mean, it would have to be basically Liechtenstein. I mean, with no army, totally surrounded by Israel in the Jordan Valley. A lot of its water and stuff would go to Israel. It would really be a very barely viable state. There's one other thing when it comes to U.S. interests or Trump's interests in Saudi Arabia, and that is his own Trump organization interests in Saudi Arabia. He's got 2 hotels there, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment there that he wants to protect. So it's very, very much in his interest to cozy up to the Crown Prince, give him what he wants. Although he did, I must add, that Trump did not give him 2 things that MBS wanted. And that was nuclear, help in developing a nuclear program, and a defense agreement where the United States agrees to protect Saudi Arabia against foreign attack. But he did sign almost a $142 billion defense agreement, selling them all kinds of equipment. So
I want to bring Vaughn into the discussion here in a minute, but given what you've said about Trump's interests vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, and given that the Saudis are Sunni, the Iranians are Shiite, how big of a deal is it, really, that the U.S. bombed Iranian nuclear sites in June 2025, and that the Israelis killed the leader of Hezbollah, the biggest, most powerful of the Iran-backed militant organizations in the Middle East? That would be Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in Lebanon with an Israeli airstrike. What are really the implications with those developments?
It's a very good question, because a lot of people are saying, well, the whole geopolitical structure in the Middle East has now changed. Israel is ascendant. Iran is down. Its proxies have been defeated. Israel is now the superpower in the Middle East. The problem here is that may be true right now, but the Middle East is very, very dynamic. And the bombing of our bombing of the Iranians, it set them back, absolutely. But Iran is rebuilding. Hezbollah is rebuilding. It's rearming. Iran is still sending weapons. They're smuggling them across Syria, which is now anti-Iranian, right? The government of Bashar al-Assad was an ally, actually the only Arab ally that Iran had. He's gone now. Ashara is now the president, and he hates Iran. But he's so focused on internal issues. I mean, Syria was totally, a lot of it was very, very badly destroyed in this war that started in 2011, and it just ended, this year. So Aleppo, one of the oldest cities in the world, goes back 5,000 years, is totally destroyed, gone. It looks like Gaza. So he's focused on internal issues, and therefore Iran and Hezbollah are able to actually get weapons across Syria and into Lebanon. And of course, the Israelis are keeping a very, very close eye on Lebanon. And I mean, just today and yesterday, they've been bombing southern Lebanon and bombing Hezbollah targets, even though there has been a ceasefire officially since November 24.
Go ahead, Vaughn.
Yeah. So another question, like staying on Syria, these regional dynamics with regard to Iran, right? After the al-Shara Trump meeting on November 10th, Special Envoy Tom Barak put out a tweet saying that al-Shara had agreed to help the U.S. in fighting against not only Islamic State extremists, but also against the influence of Iran-backed Hezbollah. What is your read on that? Is that likely to happen? And is that a potential way that al-Shara could create common ground with Israel?
That's also a very good question. I think that al-Shara's heart is in the right place. He obviously doesn't like ISIS. They are a challenge to him. What the Kurds up in the northeastern corner of Syria are at the moment fighting with U.S. help, the remnants of ISIS. But once again, his vow or his promise to fight against Hezbollah really depends on whether, what the internal situation is. He's got to stabilize his country first and foremost. Now, there was an interesting development just the other day. Syria is prosecuting quite a few people, both within his own security services and within the Alawite community. That's the community of Assad. They're basically in Latakia, over in the northeastern part of Syria. He's putting them on trial because there was sectarian violence right after al-Shara took power.
Big time sectarian violence.
Big time.
We carried a story on the start of the trial. There's a trial starting in Damascus, and it's going on right now.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, that trial itself is significant. And even though there are 14 people right now on trial from both sides, Alawite and from his own security services, hundreds more are going to be put on trial. And he's trying to show that there's going to be accountability, that he's serious about preventing sectarian violence in the country.
On that point, I did want to stay on Syria and ask you two really specific questions about domestic security in Syria. Do you think the U.S. should and will remove the Caesar Act sanctions on Syria? Those are the sanctions that Washington had imposed on the Assad regime prior to its ouster from Damascus in December last year. When al-Shara met with Trump earlier this month, the State Department waived those sanctions for 180 days, but they're still technically there on the books. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as you said, those sanctions are on the books, and they can only be lifted by Congress because they're law. Trump wants to basically get rid of the Caesar sanctions and allow U.S. aid and business and investment to go into Syria, which would be outlawed by the Caesar Act. There are members in the House and the Senate who want certain conditions put on any lifting of the Caesar Act, because they see the situation in Syria as unstable, and they want to basically, protect their flank by, if this whole thing goes to hell in a handbasket, they don't want to be in a position of having to give aid and investment. And particularly if the U.S. companies go into Syria, particularly oil and things like that, they could be endangered. So they want certain conditions put on any lifting of the Caesar Act.
John, it's Guy again. I want to totally pivot because as exciting as and unpredictable as the Middle East conflicts are, we've got this military buildup in Venezuela. And I saw that your latest article on Spy Talk, very interesting historical piece, by the way, was about Venezuela and the prospect of a regime change move or policy by the Trump administration to try and oust the Maduro government there. You warn in your article that the administration should consider history. The headline of your piece was, quote, "Ghosts of coups past haunt Trump's CIA Venezuela ops." With the little time we have left here, what should Trump understand, in your view, as he decides where to take U.S. policy toward Venezuela?
If you look at the history of CIA coups around the world, Iran, Dominican Republic, Chile, a lot of places, they I'll just take Iran, which is the example I used in my piece. It almost failed. In 1953, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected leftist prime minister of Iran. The reason was because he was going to nationalize the Iranian oil, which at the time was basically run by Britain. Britain wanted to overthrow him, but they couldn't really muster the support for it. So the CIA stepped in and said, "Okay, we'll do it." And a lot of things went wrong. They wanted to organize a group of officers that would support the coup. At the very last minute, all but one of the officers basically bowed out. They were afraid to go along with it. There were all kinds of other problems with it where it almost failed. First of all, secrecy was one of the main components of the thing. The prime minister, Mohammed, knew about it way in advance so that he could protect himself. He had
So is that what's happening in your view vis-a-vis Venezuela now with Maduro? We're just telegraphing a regime change policy?
Yes, Trump is not being very secretive about this. I think Trump authorized covert operations in Venezuela. Now, the fact that I can tell you that is the reason. Usually, covert operations are covert; they're secret.
It's pretty stunning. I mean, when we picked up on that right as he said it publicly in the Threat Status Daily newsletter, and then it's become a nut graph in our coverage that. Because for me personally, I spent about 10 years covering the U.S. intelligence community before my current existence as the national security editor over here. And I was kind of blown away that he would just come out and say that.
Sure.
That's like basically saying, oh, yeah, the agency is active on the ground around Maduro now.
Right. Now, clearly, I was talking to former CIA people, and what they were telling me was the way that our intelligence in Venezuela works is that there is a anti-Maduro Venezuelan exile community, mostly in Miami. And they have contacts within the military in Venezuela, and they are using those contacts to find out what Maduro is doing. But Maduro isn't hiding what he's doing either. He's mobilized his reserves, he's mobile. He doesn't have a very strong army, but, if the United States wants to overthrow him, they're going to have to put boots on the ground. He's not going to give up.
Jonathan Broder, it's interesting stuff. We could go on and on. Thank you so much for coming on the Threat Status Weekly podcast. I hope folks will go read your stuff at Spy Talk.
Thank you very much for having me.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here on the show where we identify a global security threat, whether it's here at home, domestically, or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting or could impact U.S. national security. Vaughn, what do you have for your threat of the week?
My threat of the week is this recent report that Mossad, that's Israel's spy agency, is reporting that the recently foiled Hamas terror plots in Europe, specifically in Germany, were allegedly planned in Turkey and Qatar by Hamas officials. Austrian authorities last month seized a collection of arms that Mossad says belonged to the son of Hamas political leader Bassem Naim. Authorities say the weapons were to be used in attack on, quote, Jewish targets. The news that Hamas may have organized these plots at their bases in Turkey and Qatar comes as Israel continues to clamp down on Hamas in Gaza, even as the terror group refuses to disarm. Hamas has political bases in Qatar and Turkey, something that Israel has raged about for years, especially after the October 7th attacks. And the United States has really also done a lot to try to dissuade Turkey and Qatar from hosting these political leaders as they try to end the violence in Gaza, particularly by removing Hamas from leadership in the region.
Interesting, Vaughn. It's notable that the UN Security Council voted in recent days to put a stabilization force on the ground inside Gaza. That's a key development that could have all kinds of implications. My threat of the week is a little bit different. It's that the Chinese government is developing capabilities for cutting undersea communications cables as part of its large-scale military buildup and preparation for potential conflict with the United States. This is actually a finding that was underscored in the annual report to Congress in recent days of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. It's a totally eye-opening report, Vaughn, and it says new cable-cutting technologies are being deployed as part of Beijing's plans for, quote, gray zone warfare. These are activities below the level of kinetic conflict. Undersea cables are the backbone of modern global communications infrastructure, and they transmit an estimated 95% of global internet traffic. My threat of the week is that China is developing capabilities to attack those cables in a way that could one day threaten the world order. And with that, a huge thanks to Jonathan Broder for joining us as this week's featured interviewee, and to you, Vaughn Cockayne. It's a pleasure always having you here on the podcast. And the biggest thanks to all of you, our listeners. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Share the podcast with all your friends. A quick reminder that we will be away next week on a hiatus for the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States, but we will be back with a fresh episode dropping on Friday, December 4 of the Threat Status Podcast.